Divorce lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you someone fuck over their spouse? I did some consulting work for 2 divorce attorneys when I was in grad school. Their client was a career airline pilot. His wife worked part-time, so there was a huge income disparity. It was an ugly divorce. During the process, but before the final decree, tax time rolled around. The wife's attorney calls my guys and says her accountant just called. If they can just share their W-2s and file jointly, they each stand to save about $8,000 over married filing separately. My guys took that info to the husband. He says, fuck her. Losing $8,000 is going to be way worse for her than it will be for me. Cold as ice, man. Dad was a real asshole and mom tried to save him a lot of money during the divorce. They have 3 kids who were 16, 13, and 8. Dad wouldn't sign any agreement my mom's lawyer produced. It had to be his idea and from his lawyer or it wasn't getting signed. Dad's lawyer was incompetent and sends an agreement that states he will pay $2,000 a month in child support until all kids are 18. Mom tried to explain to Dad that it needed to be revised to lower every time a child turned 18. Dad called mom a cunt during that negotiation, so mom said fuck it and signed the agreement, and Dad paid the $2,000 month for 10 years when he should have been paying around $1,400 month for 5 years and $700 month for the last 5 years. TLDR, Dad fucked himself out of thousands each year, but calling not a lawyer, but one of the top posts from our pro revenge is related. Credit to you, Diarrhea, not me, but a guy I worked with 10 years ago. I guess it counts as a revenge. I worked with a guy who really stuck it to his ex-wife. When I met him, he was working in a sporting goods store making $8 an hour. He was not really like the other retail monkeys. He was older, well-groomed, well-spoken, clearly educated, etc. One night after work he gets into his car and I couldn't help but notice that it was a very nice newish Jaguar. I asked him how he could afford it and he explained it to me. He had been an SVP at a well-known Fortune 50 company, which I will not mention the name of, pulling in $300K with bonuses and stock options. He was married, but the marriage fell apart, and in the divorce, she demanded that she get the house and 40% of his wages. He and his lawyer somehow managed to get her to agree to let him keep the house in exchange for 75% of his pay. No dollar figure or employer specified, lol. As soon as she took the settlement he quit his job and looked for a minimum wage job. He said to me that she gets 75% of nearly nothing now. He had other money stashed away, so he didn't even need the job, and he had the house and its equity as well. Also, no kids, so there was no child support. Just alimony. She was furious, of course, and tried to re-sue him, but failed at least once, and when she claimed that the settlement was not keeping her in the lifestyle she was accustomed to, he simply told the judge that the divorce was traumatic to him and he could no longer do his old job as a result. At least at that time, she did not manage to get out of the deal. Not sure how it all ended. But I thought it was fucking brilliant, if not crazy level spiteful. He was a good employee, too good with customers, showed up on time, no bullshit absenteeism or anything like that. He claimed he loved each payday because it reminded him how little she was getting. Not a lawyer, but when I was a kid my parents got divorced. My mom met a guy on the internet and left my dad for him. My sisters and I were all teenagers, and being that my mom had never really been around, decided that we all wanted to live with him. We all had to write a letter stating our wishes, and it was understood that we would stay with him. My mom didn't even seem to care. Additionally, my dad had this retirement account from his old job. He wasn't rich at all and had worked his ass off for everything he'd ever had. When he got hurt on the job he could have sued, but was promised that in exchange for him not suing, they'd keep him around. Instead they canned him and he left with about $100K, I think, in a 401k type account that he'd been saving for nearly 30 years. Lastly, my dad had his house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath brick house that was all of about 800 SF. It wasn't much at all, but my dad loved the place. My mom couldn't stand that house and wanted to move for as long as I could remember. That was another contentious subject that led to the divorce. He'd been paying on it forever, and when he left his old job, he took out a small chunk and paid it off. Anyway, their separation is progressing, and it's understood we're living with him. She was so in love with this internet guy that she didn't care. He was in school halfway around the country, and she was going to move there to be with him. We knew we'd get by just fine. They seemed amicable, and it was understood how this would all play out. The day in court finally comes, and instead of what we all assumed, even my dad's lawyer, she goes to the court with all these crazy claims. He was an abusive alcoholic, he beat us and my mom nightly, he was crazy, and no one would be safe in his care. My mom got full custody, she got 50% of his house and 50% of his retirement account. My dad was stunned. That judgment would basically bankrupt him. In order for him to keep the house, he'd essentially have to clean out his retirement account and give her everything. The night of their divorce I went over to see him. He was almost catatonic. He just stared off in space the entire time and would mumble whenever I asked him a question. I've never seen anyone like that ever. My birthday was 2 days away and I asked if he wanted to do something for my birthday, and he just answered with, "Your mom has full custody. I will if she allows me to see you." I asked if I could drive his old truck to school since I didn't yet have a car, and he just said no, that I needed to call my mom and have her pick me up. So that's what I did. And the next day in school, the day before my birthday, I'm sitting in our lunchroom when I hear, "Hey, isn't it your grandpa?" from a buddy of mine. I look over and see my grandpa and a cop making their way across the lunchroom toward me. They told me to grab my stuff, and in the office I found my sister there as well. We rode home with them, where we were also met by my little sister, and that's where they told us that our dad had killed himself shortly after I left the previous night. To make matters worse, it all happened so quickly that nothing had been finalized. My mom dropped all her paperwork and legally became a widow and got everything: house, retirement and his insurance policy. She also got social security benefits for us, a fact we didn't find out until much later. She basically took all the money and moved across the country with her new man, leaving us to care for ourselves for the most part. And to this day, when asked about raising us, she'll spin this story of a young widow doing her best to raise 3 kids on her own. Over here in the Netherlands, most legal costs are paid for by the government if your income is below a certain threshold. In practice, this means that if one of the spouses in a divorce has little to no income and the other one has a normal income, the one with the normal income will have to pay a lot of the process drags on. Considering there are plenty of ways to drag it on, I've seen cases approach ridiculous amounts of billable hours. There is a catch to this, however. Your lawyer is paid a set amount if he or she is paid by the government. However, should the money you receive after a divorce or with exceed a certain number, you are expected to pay your own lawyer, which is the reason we still keep track of the hours in these cases. So this one woman who thought she was screwing over her ex-husband by dragging the divorce over multiple years got a payout of euros 40k by the end of it. Unfortunately for her, she had to surrender most of that straight back in lawyer costs. There was a certain sense of justice in there. Also proves time and again that, when there is conflict, the only true winners are usually the lawyers. My dad actually got fucked by his divorce lawyer during my parents' divorce last year. My dad and my sister have never gotten along, and over the years it got more and more strained. They eventually got into a physical fight which led to a CPS report and him getting slapped with a child abuse record. They labeled it as confirmed but isolated, so he's not on the registry and you can only see it with certain background checks. In this case, my mom was obviously going to get full custody of my sister. My mom also wanted to give my dad the house and his cars and his money pit of a boat. Lawyer decided, because my dad is stubborn as fuck, that he would string all that along. Lawyer spent hours with my dad trying to convince him that dad could get more money and custody from my mom. They did a divorce mediation so they wouldn't have to go to court, and lawyer dragged it out for 4 hours. The whole time he was riling my dad up, thinking he could get things like the original down payment on the house, half custody of my sister, my mom's car, etc. At the end of the 4 hours of mediation, lawyer told my dad he should take the deal that my mom and her lawyer had originally offered in the first place, and dad signed that. So he paid about $12,000 in completely unnecessary legal fees. I actually saw a short film adaptation of this. It was hilarious. Dude cheated on his GF with her best friend, and the two of them decided to get together, so they sat down with the original GF to inform her. She asked to have the apartment she and her BF had lived in, which was admittedly a lovely apartment, but was told that ex-BF and ex-BFF intended to start living there together basically as soon as she'd finished moving out. She conceded and asked to have it to herself for a weekend instead, just to move her stuff out and have some time to herself before she'd move out temporarily. The exes agree, and that weekend the ex-GF proceeds to enjoy some bottles of wine, some seafood, and then stuffs the curtain rods with every leftover she has, plus her ex's favorite treat, caviar. She left a can of the stuff in the fridge. Afterwards, the exes move in and proceed to make it their little love pad, but it doesn't take long for them to realize something's amiss, although it takes them a while to realize it's the stench that's steadily growing stronger, and from there on cracks start appearing in their relationship, etc. In the end, the ex-BF gets back in contact with the scorned ex-GF, and he sells her the much coveted apartment for a fraction of the original price. Bonus, he had the whole place renovated in an attempt to find the source of the smell, so she got an awesome deal out of it. He couldn't figure out why she kept cracking up when she came to pick up the keys, nor her preoccupation with the curtain rods. He had put new ones in for the sale. My stepdad has been divorced twice before. Both marriages had kids involved. First divorce was mutual and had shared custody of the kids. Second was because he was cheated on and also involved shared custody of kids. Wife number 1 lived out of state and kept no showing, forcing costly legal action every time he wanted to see his kid. Wife number 2 was initially supportive of him through this until they had kids themselves and the cost became too much. Wife number 1 wanted him to give up legal rights to their kids, and after years and years of legal battles that nearly bankrupted them, wife number 2 basically gave him an ultimatum: give up the kids or get divorced. He knew that getting divorced from wife number 2 could result in him never seeing his other kids either, so eventually he was forced into giving up kid number 1. A few years later, wife number 2 cheats on him. They get divorced. Wife number 2 tells the kids it was him that cheated, but to never mention it to him in case he gets angry. Initially they were splitting custody very evenly, but eventually wife number 2 figured out that she would get more money if she was technically sole custodian, and he would see them on that basis because he loves his children. So to arrange for this to happen, she accused him of molesting their youngest child, then used that accusation to gain full custody before the charge was dropped due to total lack of evidence. Then she tells the kids that he did molest them, again something he didn't know she told them for years. Upshot is that he was forced to give up first kids permanently by one wife, and then second wife had the rest of his kids think he was a cheater and sexual predator, and thus be terrified of him and never truly love him, so she could save face and pick up a larger check. Like TAMMY number 1 and TAMMY number 2 on crack.edit. Also, to be 100% clear, this story has details omitted or changed for the purpose of not identifying anyone. If this sounds like someone you know, then I fully empathize with them, but we probably aren't talking about that same person, which in itself is terribly sad, I think. Not a lawyer, but I met with a scummy one when I was looking to get a divorce. The first lawyer I met with, who had been recommended by a coworker as an amazing divorce attorney, suggested that, if I wanted full custody, I should make sure people knew the relationship was abusive. Tell my friend's family, make sure the neighbors heard me screaming begging him not to hit me, document every bruise, even if I wasn't sure it came from him. Thing is, my relationship wasn't abusive, and I'd already told her that multiple times. She never outright said I should fabricate evidence or anything, but she ignored my repeated statements that there was no abuse and kept on with her detailed instructions of how to document any abuse that might happen. I got the distinct impression that she was letting me know how to create an abusive relationship out of thin air in order to get custody of my kids. I ended up not using her as an attorney for obvious reasons, and in the end my ex and I shared 50-50 physical and legal custody of our children and raised them together despite whatever issues we had with each other. I can't help but wonder, though, how many dads lost a relationship with their kids because of her zealous coaching. Not a divorce lawyer, but I did surgical rotations with an OB-GYN and have personally seen the lowest of the low in divorce hearings. People say a lot of shit when trying to place blame or get custody. A lot of it is straight up lies. Not all lies can be erased or taken back. The worst one is an accusation of sexual abuse. You cannot redact an accusation of sexual abuse against a minor. It happened ridiculously more frequently than I can stomach. A spouse, trying to get the upper hand, makes the claim. Now the lawyer court state is bound by law to investigate. And suddenly that precious innocent child that mommy is trying to gain custody of is brought to the OR, sedated, and then investigated inside and out for evidence of abuse. Those are about the only days that nobody in the entire wing says anything. No jokes, no smiles. Just a sick feeling in your stomach that takes away all appetite and joy. So many times, the parent who makes the accusation finds out what they're about to put the child through and tries to take it back. Tries to cancel the procedure, tries to say they may have been confused or mistaken, or even admits they flat out lied. Doesn't matter. Once that box is opened, the investigation must continue. Of the couple dozen cases I saw, I can only recall one that supported the accusation. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but my parents are currently going through a divorce. Luckily kids are all in late 20s 30s, so no custody battle, but basically my mum is a nutter and is desperately trying to screw my dad over as much as humanly possible. She told her lawyer that he has so many hidden assets when in fact he has none. She lied and told the mediator that he has a record collection worth hundreds of thousands when in fact it's probably worth like £8. She said his guitar collection was worth tens of thousands, whereas second-hand value, like maybe pounds 2k. She wants all of his business's assets. All of them. She wants both houses. Her lawyer repeatedly reminds her that at most she'd get half of everything, but she clearly doesn't listen. Then she demanded back all of the kids, Christmas and birthday presents from our childhood, like the violin they bought me when I was 13. It's hers. Obviously. Per second. Her lawyer laughed at her and reminded her that's not how divorce works. They're still in the very early mediation process, so it'll be interesting to see how shit goes once they actually get started properly. Interestingly, despite her hollering that it's all my dad's fault, she was the one that walked out and subsequently shacked up with my dad's brother, whose wife had died 3 weeks earlier. Yeah, and that's why I'm completely no contact with my dickhead of a mother.